Okay, if I could get everyone's attention, we'll get started. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Ryan Heath, and I work for Politico as the author of the Brussels Playbook. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here at this ungodly hour this morning. I think the sun is up now. It wasn't when I came into the building. But thank you for joining us in the room. Thank you to everyone who is watching online for this Playbook breakfast with the European Commissioner Vera Jourová. I want to say thank you to our partner Samsung, first and foremost, without whom we couldn't be doing this event. And of course, this event is being live streamed, so you have plenty of interaction from the audience online via the hashtag PlaybookBreakfast. And we are using a system that's not quite new, but it's new-ish, to get through as many questions as possible today. Commissioner Jourová has a very diverse portfolio, from the depths of privacy to our fundamental rights to the breadth of consumer policy, all those sort of things like Dieselgate. She's from the Czech Republic. They've got elections coming up this week, so it's going to be action-packed. And to get through as many questions as possible, we use a system called Slido. And that means you need to get the Slido app on your phone, and if you enter questions in there, we can get through more of them rather than spending our morning passing microphones around. And of course, it gives you something legitimate to do with your phones, so I won't be able to think that we're being boring up here and that you're not paying attention. Now, before we get started, we have a short speech from our sponsor, Samsung. So I would love to invite up onto the stage Mr. Sung-Woo Kim. And of course, please come on up, sir, and remind you that we've got evaluation forms. So I will be reminding you and haranguing you to fill them out before you leave. Mr. Kim, take it away. Thank you very much. Thank you.
This will be very short. Don't worry. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Samsung Electronics, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to give opening remarks. I am looking very much forward to the discussion with Commissioner Jourová and Ryan. In the next few minutes, I would like to talk about bridges. In today's world, everything is about connection and interconnection. So I will briefly talk about three types of bridges. First, EU as a bridge. Second, bridges between EU and Korea. Third, bridges to the future. The EU is a remarkable example of bridging the interests of sovereign countries. Without the EU, we would face a mosaic of different domestic rule sets, and no bridges in the form of EU agreements with the rest of the world. Samsung strives to be a good European corporate citizen with our investment in manufacturing and R&D in Europe. We have a lot of confidence in the EU and its institutions going forward. We trust the integrity of the single market will be preserved and that global regulatory fragmentation can be avoided. Now turning to the bridges between the EU and Korea. Let me recall three important bridges. The first, the EU-South Korea Customs Agreement signed in 1997. The second was the Framework Agreement on Trade and Cooperation, enacted on the 1st of April in 2001. The third bridge of great importance was built in 2010, when the EU and Korea signed the Free Trade Agreement. It was the EU's first FTA with an Asian country. It removed virtually all tariffs and many non-tariff barriers, and at the time, it was also the most contemporary bridge of its kind. We also trust Europe will continue to pursue the economic priority of fostering innovation, which poses both immense opportunities and might also test its future. It is common wisdom that innovation drives economic growth. For example, it is estimated that the data economy could add almost 650 billion euros to the European economy by 2020, an increase of some 3% to the overall EU GDP. To convert innovation into growth, EU needs innovation-friendly rules. To be able to benefit from the data economy, EU needs an effective regulatory framework, including with Europe's global partners. So, I am very confident that Commissioner Jourová and her team play a very important role in building bridges to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Jourová, if I could invite you up onto the stage. Sorry. And welcome. So, I have to apologize. I hear you're not a morning person.
Yes.
That, like me, you stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Good morning. My cat was very nervous. She kept waking me up.
So I apologize for breaching your fundamental rights by getting you up here this early this morning. So maybe if we start off on, there are no light notes. It's a very serious world these days. But maybe a thing that people won't know about you was that you became a lawyer in your 40s. And that is a really interesting story. The commissioner was falsely accused of being involved in an EU funds bribery scandal. But anyway, you qualified as a lawyer because you wanted to learn about the system that had caused this problem for you.
I wanted to be able to defend in the system where an innocent person can be accused and put to jail and totally destroyed. And I wanted to know how come the law should work differently. You can imagine, till my 43, I believed the law and justice is a system which is to deliver justice to people. And I found out it's not true. So I wanted to know how it should work.
And, well, you became the Justice Commissioner, so that's a bit of a slam dunk success, I would say. Is there any...
I kept studying. You can imagine, to study law in Czech Republic, it means you keep memorizing hours, nights, days. And my children told me, "Mommy, what are you doing? Shouldn't you get a good job, well paid?" And I promised to them, I promise, after I finish the study, I will find a good job. And so on.
Well, it worked out. It worked out. Are there any causes you can imagine going out and fighting for once you're not a commissioner anymore, where you would dive in and use that law degree?
Well, it was a symbolic thing, because when I came to the commission, when I was nominated by the Czech government, I really wanted to continue the sector which is so close to my heart, which is regional policy, and I was assigned to do justice. And now I see there some symbolic feature in it that over my mandate we managed to adopt, for instance, the directive guaranteeing presumption of innocence and the treatment of the people accused of crime as if they are innocent. It is not so obvious in all the member states that this rule is kept. So these things were bringing me back to those bad memories. Yep. Yes, it is a symbolic, fascinating experience.
And it's a rule of law question as well, isn't it? And that to go from the micro of your rule of law experience to the macro, where we have these situations in Poland, in Catalonia. I think you were even a tourist guide in Barcelona, so you've got all of these touch points on the
I have long CV. I did many jobs.
Exactly. Let's take Catalonia, for example. I mean, what do you feel when you see all of those tensions and fights now between Madrid and Barcelona?
I'm sorry that there very probably was not the proper political dialogue between the Spanish and Catalonian side, because the things simply went too far. And I think that we saw mistakes on both sides, which I hope can be improved now. Let's hope.
And gender equality is something that is getting more and more in the headlines, not just from the legal perspective of are women participating at sufficient levels in public life and so on. But we were seeing over the last 2 weeks, every day there is some new set of allegations around, for example, Harvey Weinstein, or a politician putting their foot in it by making an inappropriate comment about how issues like harassment should be treated. How do you find tackling those issues, where you have a responsibility as the Gender Equality Commissioner? It's difficult to implement laws at the EU level in that regard. But then obviously there are problems everywhere in relation to harassment, assault, bullying. Like, do you have any advice for women in Brussels or elsewhere about how they can respond to that environment?
I'm afraid what we see is that just the peak of the iceberg, because the women do not report that they have been victims of violence. And there is still that feeling, I am guilty, I deserved it. It is a very strange feeling, which in fact prevents women from going and reporting to police, because violence against women, or violence as such, is a crime which should be reported. So now when there is such a strong societal response to this latest case, I think it's very good. Of course, it's bad that this happened, but it's good that the women react. And there is no easy response how to solve this. The law, we have the law. We are lacking enforcement of the law. And also still we have to work a lot to change the mindset of people in Europe, because we have some surveys which show that still a lot of people in Europe think that to beat a woman is a normal, a kind of accepted thing.
That comes up in the Eurobarometer survey.
Yes. So we have to work on in different fronts. As I said, the law is in place. So we have now acceded as the EU to the so-called Istanbul Convention, which is a big step forward, because the convention guarantees the special treatment for the victims of this kind of violence, and introduces a lot of practical measures, including the one that the perpetrator of domestic violence can be put out, so that not to continue this wrongdoing. And I hope the member states will ratify this Istanbul Convention soon, because still we have 14 member states standing behind or aside. But we are running over the whole year a very big campaign against violence against women, because, as I said, we have to change the perception of the society that this is something normal.
Yep. And we have, in the EU Confidential podcast that I've been hosting over the last few months, we give advice. There's a section in that podcast where we give advice to anyone who's experienced possibly not violence, but other inappropriate behaviors in the workplace. And it's one that crops up often in the European Parliament, but in other elements of Brussels life. Do you have any advice you would give to anyone who finds themselves under pressure from a boss or a colleague subject to that kind of harassment?
My advice would be, don't keep it with yourself. Go and find the helping hand. Don't be ashamed to say it to someone. There is some kind of stigmatization in it. I remember very well the moment when I was in the European Parliament speaking about the issue of violence against women, and there were, I think, 100 women, and we had fresh statistical figures that every third woman has been a victim of either physical or psychological violence. And I have some time there, because I am sitting and listening the comments and proposals of the members of the parliament, and I was thinking about those women sitting there, every third. There must be some sitting here. And I said, I myself was the victim of such violence. The media later turned it that it was my husband. It was not my husband. It was somebody else. But I stood up and said I was the victim of such violence. Who else? And no reaction. And I think that now when the women openly speak about their
It's
experience...
more encouraging now, the Me Too tag and other movements that we've been seeing.
It could open eyes of the society.
Okay. Maybe if we switched a little bit to your consumer role now. Dieselgate is one thing that gets me mad. You know, I just find it disgraceful. And
Thank you for sharing this with me.
Yeah, I mean, every time I walk down the Rue de la Loire, I just think how many minutes are being taken from my life as a result of what is being spewed out onto us. So I don't know if I'm alone there, and maybe it's why it's a good thing I'm not in charge and that you're in charge of this portfolio, because I'm a bit biased, I would say. But what happens next there? Like, clearly you have a situation where consumers have been ripped off. You have a number of companies that haven't offered what has been offered to US consumers. The previous commission, let's admit it, wasn't covered in glory either around this scenario. So you and Commissioner Bieńkowska, how are we going to get justice for those people who've been ripped off? How are we going to stop it from going on?
Alžběta Bieńkowska is responsible for industry, if I simplify it. And she deals with the technical and environmental norms which must be respected and obeyed by the producers. I have the consumer's angle, where, yes, there is a strong reason to be upset. Because when I came into this Dieselgate, I think it was August 2015 already, 16, 15. And we found out that Volkswagen does not treat the consumers in the member states in the same way. And in some member states, the people even didn't get any information, as if nothing happened. Such a monster scandal, cheating the consumers. European consumers looking at United States, where the owners of such cars were paid. They have been given compensation, and in Europe, they do not even deserve an information. I was very upset, and that's why I started not the procedure, because I do not have the legal power. The Commission doesn't have the legal power to start any official procedure. But I engaged in a dialogue with Volkswagen, and I was pushing them to inform the people, to offer them a quick repair of the car without any bad consequences and bad effect on the engine or consumption or other features, and to offer some bonus, something which will compensate the inconvenience which the consumers experienced. And believe me, it was not easy to agree on, especially on the bonus, because I didn't want the financial compensation. In every discussion we had, also through media, I saw the figure, we are employing 600,000 people in Europe. So the Commission, stop doing that. You are endangering the jobs. Not me, they are endangering the
And is
jobs.
the problem that we can't do collective lawsuits as easily in Europe as in the United States? Would they be acting differently to you if there were 1 million consumers out there filing a lawsuit?
I am sure if we have such instrument in the EU, which the consumers could use for joining forces, and going to the court with the common plea or request, Volkswagen would have to behave differently. But of course, I'm not happy about Dieselgate. This is an obvious cheating and disappointed consumers and decreased trust for EU industry. This is also very important for me, although I am Consumers Protection Commissioner. But this is a lesson we learned, and that's why I am using Dieselgate as an example, that we cannot continue like that. And I would like to propose some kind of European class action or a collective redress possibility for the EU consumers. It should be done within the package which we will adopt in March 2018.
And so that's the New Deal for consumers.
It's the New Deal for consumers, where we do not want to increase the rights of consumers because we are on a very good level already now, but the enforcement is not sufficient, and the consumers are a kind of helpless. We live now in the world. I always say that the big ones are becoming bigger and the small ones are becoming smaller. And it also applies to digital sphere.
Well, I see a lot of digital questions coming from the screen. I promise we're going to get to them very soon. I remember back in 2009 when I was still working at the Commission was when the first big push was made to do this possibility to make the collective lawsuits easier. And it was the German CDU who were the biggest blocker. They're the ones who stopped it the first time. I have a feeling they were involved in delaying it the second time. Are you working on those sort of interests so that you're in a better position when you put forward this new deal next year?
It doesn't apply only in this case that past lost battles should discourage us from trying again. There are many of them in the history of the EU. We have to try again. I think now we have the momentum. Dieselgate, paradoxically, is helping us, but also many other cases of massive harm caused to or done to the consumers. And we simply need to equip the consumers with this possibility to join forces. And I am sure that this is the right thing. My philosophy for consumers' angle of my portfolio is that we want the consumers to be adult, responsible, well-informed people to take adult and responsible decisions and to be stronger in self-defense. So this is in one package.
Now, another area where the consumer meets the political, one of the big divides that we're seeing in European Union debates now is East versus West. And you've just come back from the Bratislava summit that was looking at food quality. If we listen to Viktor Orban, we might think people in the East were eating out of trash bins at the moment in terms of the dual food quality issue. Tell us, what is really the mood there? Can Jean-Claude Juncker, when he sits down to dinner, hopefully a high-quality one tonight with the Visegrad leaders, can an unlikely friendship form there? Can we really do some good on the food quality issue?
You mentioned the name of the Hungarian Prime Minister, Mr. Orbán. I was in Bratislava on Friday. There was not only Mr. Orbán, but also the prime ministers of other 3 Visegrad Group countries. It was a big event. And Mr. Orbán said one important thing, that we need to know how big the problem is, because we, the people in the East, are suspective. We think that it's bigger than it is, maybe. And it sounded very, very good to me, because this is exactly what we now want to do, to test how big the problem is and to do it through a number of testings of a number of products to identify the scope of the problem, not only geographical, but also the scope in terms of the number of products where the consumers are clearly cheated. There is some artificial substitute instead of meat. But I have very good understanding of the problem of also my country, because there is the sentiment. The people still remember, as well as I do, because I said at the beginning I have long CV. And I remember in 1990, when the Iron Curtain crashed, we went shopping to Rec, which is a small town near the Czech-Austrian border. And we bought coffee and chocolate. We didn't have enough money, or just a little amount of Austrian shillings.
But you knew there was a difference, and that's why you
we brought it home and we put it on the table, and the whole family came to look at how Austrian coffee and Austrian chocolate looks and tastes. And it tasted bloody differently. And still the people remember that, and still they go to shop to buy things across the border. Now, in 2017, with the single market principle and single market functioning in the EU, there is something wrong. And so I decided to get into it. I think through the consumers protection angle, I am well placed, also as a person from the East. I very much appreciate that Jean-Claude Juncker recognized that we have a problem, that it's not just another invention of within the East-West saga, and that it is worth solving. So we are going to solve it, to test how big is the problem, to have the discussion with the producers, and if it doesn't help, the national inspections of the market, for the market surveillance should start acting.
Now let's bring in some questions. I'll make sure that you can see them down there. I'm a Democrat, so I thought we were going to go straight to digital, but I see that there are actually two pretty important questions about the sexual harassment issue, and one of them has a digital angle. So let's combine them. Those two questions are you worried that if you scratch the surface, there would be a Me Too problem of sexual harassment in the EU institutions? And also, Silicon Valley is notoriously sexist, says Victoria Main. How do you think women in tech fare in Europe compared to Silicon Valley?
My advice is the same as I already said before. The women should defend themselves and report. We have in the EU institutions such possibility to report and to have the problem solved. And of course, I will not hide that I think that also here we know only about several cases and that the problem might be bigger. But the system where I work, the Commission, also the Parliament, I think that the system itself tries to be, to respect the principle of gender equality. And
I suspect it might be better in the Commission, where when you are civil servants with full-time roles, reasonably well paid in the Commission, I think women have a stronger footing, or anyone, it happens to men too, in the Parliament, where you can be gone from one day to the next. It's not the same contract system.
I heard some rumors that you might be true.
We will investigate. A question from Bjarke Smith-Meyer, who's one of our journalists at Politico. He says that MEPs have twice rejected your blacklist for money laundering countries, accusing you of copy-pasting work done by the FATF. Bjarke is a smarter person than me, I don't know what that is. How will you bridge the divide?
We will bridge the divide by having our own list by the end of the next year, adding some criteria which are not used by FATF, FATF, how do you read it? Of course, we are relying on the work of FATF because there is, I think, good method. There is a thorough assessment of the risk of the respective country. There are site inspections. So yes, we rely on this work, but we are not copy-pasting. We have also our criteria which will be applied and which will probably add some more countries. I still hope that the list which we are going to submit now to the Parliament will be adopted, because this is too serious and too much is at stake here to let it stay like it was last year, because we still work now with the list from 2016. And too much is at stake. We keep speaking about the need to fight against terrorism and to increase security and also by fighting against money laundering and organized crime. So this list is absolutely crucial. To have this list updated so that the banks can check the risky financial transactions on the basis of a relevant updated list. So this is very important, and I still hope that this list of the Commission will be adopted this year, and next year we will come with something which will be more European-based.
And On that note, another European-based system is the public prosecutor's office that you're pushing to set up. Tell us how that's going. I think, are the Dutch on board now? They've got a new government. I hear they're joining. Where are we at in getting that system up and running?
If the Dutch are listening now, I would advise them, please join.
The Dutch are listening.
Join
Everyone
the
listens to
EPPO.
Playbook Break.
The public prosecutor, European Public Prosecutor's Office, is first ever European law enforcement body which should have the decision-making power to prosecute the perpetrators and to propose to the court in the member state to start court procedure. This is a big step forward, and I truly believe that it is a bad news for the people who are committing fraud or are corrupted, abusing the money of the EU taxpayers. And this story of the EPPO is about something much bigger than just the money. This is about the trust of the taxpayers, because they send their money to the European budget, and they expect us to protect the money. I'm sure there is a very strong public demand. The Dutch and the Swedes are the net contributors to the EU budget. I think they should be strongly interested in joining the EPPO and having their money under better control. So that's my message to Amsterdam and Stockholm. Then Malta is missing, because at this moment we have only 20 member states. 3 have the so-called opt-out from the criminal justice cooperation. It's UK, Ireland, and Denmark. So we, in fact, speak about 25 member states. And 5 are missing. We have 20 on board.
Well, Malta has a strong interest. I mean, it's an absolutely tragic case, but we know this week, with the murder of the journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, they've called in the FBI to assist in that investigation. So I don't want to equate other less violent crimes and problems with that horrible situation there, but clearly Malta is able to look beyond its borders for assistance. So surely it's logical they would want to be involved in this project too.
Yeah, this is absolutely a tragical case. And of course, it was a brave woman. She was fighting for something very big. She was seeking for the truth on behalf of all of us. And I am also sure, I didn't know her personally, but I am sure she was a good person. So, besides of declaring this is an absolute tragic case, of course we have to look at Malta. And we have to push further on Malta joining the prosecutor's office, because prosecutor's office should investigate also big VAT cross-border fraud. And here we have a big figure. The estimation of the fraud is monstrous, 50 billion euro a year. And I am sure that it will be useful for Malta to join, and I will keep pushing. Also, we will keep pushing Malta for implementing properly the anti-money laundering directive, which has not been done yet. So I will focus on Malta a lot, not only after this tragic case.
Now we have some more questions coming in. For anyone who just joined us online and didn't catch the suggestion at the beginning, if you go to slido.com and you use the password PB Jourová, then you can pose a question through slido.com and we will see it on the screen in front of us and get through as many as we can. We have another one from a Politico journalist, Lauren Cyrillus. He asks, should data flows be included in trade agreements? Why aren't they being included in the Japan trade deal? And then I'm sure our friends from Samsung and Korea might be interested to know, can it get added into the EU-Korea trade deal? What's your take on all of that?
I think it will be a matter of also future development. At present, we are intensively working on trade agreement with Japan, and I am, in a parallel track, intensively working on the possible adequacy decision taken for Japan. It will be a reciprocal exercise, because the Japanese partners want to do the same thing after assessing the European standards for data protection. So for Japan, we go into parallel strands of work. For the future trade agreements, there is a question mark whether it will develop further, but I am of the opinion that trade agreement is trade agreement,
Yep.
and that the data protection deserve its own unique arrangement, because...
So these, and I think I'm not an expert either, but
I am an
clarify.
expert.
I know, that's why I want you to clarify.
Either.
So we have, so an adequacy ruling, that's when essentially you're verifying that another system is meeting European data protection standards, and it exists separate from the trade agreement. Now, I don't like to gossip, but a little bird told me that there are some people in the Commission that really do want them in these trade agreements, and others, including Martin Selmayr, want the adequacy ruling system to continue. Is that kind of the dividing line, that there are these two competing schools of thought on the issue?
Yes, there is such a discussion running. You have good information.
I do. You can feel free to clarify. I don't know everything.
At this moment, for Japan, we go in those parallel lines. I think it's logical that the protection of data goes hand in hand with trade talks, because the business cooperation now is so much dependent on data transfers that it really deserves full attention and full-fledged agreement.
But am I right in saying you don't want it to become a victim of trade politics? That you want it to stand alone and survive regardless of whether a whole trade deal goes under in a big political debate?
Yes.
Okay. Now, today is a big privacy day, a big data day generally. You've got a Privacy Shield update coming. Is there anything you can preview on that before the official announcement?
I was recommended only to reveal that it has 36 pages.
Yes, but...
Is it enough?
You don't always have to follow your advisor's advice. I mean, we love a scoop here at Playbook.
Yes, of course. I said that the first annual review will be the moment of truth, that I will be honest and I will do my best to reflect the reality. You said before that to take an adequacy decision is to verify whether the standards of protection of data are okay on the other side. I think it's much stronger, and I felt it when we finalized or were finalizing the negotiations with the United States, still under Mr. Obama's administration, that by taking adequacy decision with the United States, the Commission is a kind of taking over part of the responsibility for what's happening with the private data of Europeans on American soil. And private data, it is the identity of people. It's fundamental right, how we Europeans understand it. So this is absolutely crucial that we do not have any gaps and loopholes in the system, which should be perfectly running, protecting the identity and the private data of Europeans in the United States. Of course, the change from Mr. Obama to Mr. Trump created some waves and concerns on our side. Because
I didn't notice. I thought it was all smooth.
Of course, we have poker face, especially in these sensitive situations. But we desperately needed to verify whether America first doesn't mean America only. And whether in the United States of Mr. Trump will understand the concerns of Europeans, that we are stubborn people who simply want to have privacy protected, and that no business interest will excuse some breach of our privacy. So I went to the United States in March to test where we are. I came back slightly optimistic, and now today we are going to publish the review, which will say, simply said, Privacy Shield is a well-running system. It is helping the legal certainty for transfers of data, and it is guaranteeing the protection of private data of Europeans. There is some space for improvement, and we are listing, I think, 10 different things which should be improved, and we are not giving any deadline, but I think the tone of the review is quite urgent.
And do you think it will stick once the general data protection regulation is fully implemented next year, or is it another heavy lift next year to make sure the US is going to meet those new standards?
From what I heard in Silicon Valley from the key actors, key players in digital world, they got used to GDPR, General Data Protection rules in Europe, which should come into force in May next year. They told me they are ready, and they understand why we are doing that. And I am proud that the EU is the first, because what we see also through our work on the future possible adequacy decisions, which means, among other things, that we are testing the quality of the data protection legislation in many countries in the whole world. We see that the European Union is setting the global standard for the protection of private data. Logically, because we have very strong tradition in protecting fundamental rights, and we are not so much and strongly pushed by business interests. I'm sorry to say that in such a bold way, but this is how I see that we are freer in promoting the strong protection. And if the companies want to operate on the European market, they simply have to cope with it.
And there's a third really strong lobby. So you have the private interests, you have the US government. You also have the Article 29 working group of all of the national data regulators. And I've never known them to be shy. They are probably one of the unhappiest group of regulators in the world, I would say.
I am sometimes unhappy with them, together with them.
Tell us more, tell us more. So I imagine they're going to have some criticisms too. Do you anticipate that? What could you do to accommodate whatever criticisms they might come forward with in reaction to your report?
We take their comments and proposals very seriously. It's good to understand our positions. The Commission, working on Privacy Shield as a special regime for United States, we had to take in mind the whole triangle. That is the protection of privacy, protection of security, and of course we have to take seriously when the American partners tell us, for the sake of security, we sometimes have to work with the private data of people. We do the same in Europe. And the third angle is economic interest, not only of the American business. There is a very strong economic reason for the European companies, especially medium and small ones. So we have to take into consideration all three angles. The Working Party 29 have this unique position looking first and foremost on the protection of private data. That's the role of the enforcer, and I was quite happy that we had the experts from Working Party 29 in Washington 3 weeks ago when we started to work on this review, because we want to work with their very stringent proposals and comments to be safe and to have the true reflection of where we are with Privacy Shield. We were there as a Team Europe. They keep their independence. I'm not interfering, but what I can say today, the annual review works a lot with their view.
Now, another digital issue where there can often be a gap between the intentions and the implementation is when we're talking about terrorist or other hateful content that's online. There's a big terror package that when you get off the stage, you're going into the College of Commissioners, you're going to discuss this terror package. Another top question we have from Joanna Puczynska is, do you expect the Commission to come out with legislation for flagging and removing illegal content? And what do you think of the German hate speech law?
I cannot predict what will happen. The timing is rather short because we should come back if with a legislation in the first quarter of 2018. And we said that we will monitor and assess whether the self-regulatory arrangement works well, whether the IT companies have enough social responsibility, effort to delete in due time illegal content. And if this doesn't work, of course, we will look into the German law, which is also contained in...
So you want to keep the stick there if the carrot of the companies working outside of legislation doesn't work?
It's not that simple. Of course, the carrot, if it works like this, it would be easier for us. But we have much bigger ambition, because by pushing the IT sector doing this, we are also inviting the civil society and the member states and the wide range of people and institutions who share with us the conviction that hate speech, calling for killing other people, is totally unacceptable. For me, this is the valuable aspect of this exercise we are running now. If we come with the legislation, we will simply prohibit something. And I am worried about losing this momentum of common work against the rise of hatred in the EU. We must not be passive.
Now, we almost got through a whole event in Brussels without talking about Brexit. But I have to say that when we got onto the hate speech issue, it reminded me of Amber Rudd, because she's been very vocal on this issue. And then I used that to join up in my brain to Brexit, because another thing she had said very recently was, I don't want to say it was a threat, but I think we can read between the lines. There was a bit of a threat there. And it was about removing UK data from European databases, for example, Europol-related stuff, if the UK leaves the Union without a Brexit deal. What do you think about that scenario? Is that a real risk? Is that something you're working behind the scenes to stop from happening?
I am not that paranoid, I must say. I trust in the Brits. They will not disappear. They will not get to some hostile position towards the EU. I still hope very deeply that we will finally come to a good agreement on a very strong strategic partnership, which will be based on trust, mutual trust. I see that the British partners are running quickly towards the implementation of the GDPR and of other rules which for the data protection connected with handling data in prosecution and police investigations sphere. And I do believe we will have a good agreement for the future where we will be able to trust each other.
I think that almost answers the question that's just popped up on Slido here about will you be able to ensure high data protections going forward with the UK? So I think you're saying yes, or at the very least they'll be having a great privacy shield with us.
We have many reasons to think so.
Yeah. And then a final question there on the databases. If the UK isn't willing to accept the ECJ, the European Court of Justice oversight, can they still stay in those databases, or is that the dividing line where if they say no, they have to be out of the databases and coming with a workaround like the Danes of having an officer sitting in the next room who can verify the data quickly?
Of course, for the sake of continuity and predictability, we will be negotiating in favor of respecting the ECJ rulings, not only in the sphere of data. What we have first of all in mind are the citizens' rights. And this is the painful moment in the Brexit negotiations, that we still do not have any good news for the people, for the European Union people living on British islands and vice versa. We need to do this as soon as possible and to clarify also the role of ECJ. And then let's speak and finalize the talks on finance and the borders. But people first. When you are divorcing, also the first interest is to tackle the issue of the children. This is maybe very primitive comparison, but we are in a similar situation.
No, but it's a reasonable point, because you're there to protect vulnerable groups, and children obviously are among them. I think we've got time for just one or two more questions. Willem Rokens asks, will there be, or when will there be, a legislative proposal on whistleblower protection? If not this year, will it be part of the 2018 work program of the Commission?
Yeah, we foresee an initiative for 2018. I don't know myself at this moment whether it will be a hard piece of legislation, something like directive, or whether it will be a recommendation. But we definitely want to strengthen the protection of whistleblowers in the EU. We need brave people to report, especially serious crime, money laundering, corruption, health, security problems, environmental crime. We have a lot of bad things in Europe which need good people to start starting to solve them.
And now I think one final question, I'll make it a digital one. Being undemocratic here, it didn't get the highest votes, but it's digital and we maybe didn't do enough of that yet. It's acknowledging from an anonymous person that the General Data Protection Regulation is landmark legislation, but we're also now talking about updating the e-privacy directive, which includes those famous cookie notifications that we all get when we go to websites. Are you concerned that what is being discussed on e-privacy might contradict the General Data Protection?
It must not happen.
How will you make sure it doesn't happen?
We are very vigilant, we, the GDPR people, because that's the so-called lex generalis. It is the basic framework for everything connected with data. And it's not only e-privacy, it's also everything we do on robotics.
But it's the parent legislation. E-privacy has to fit on.
Sure, and it must be consistent. It must not slip out of this framework. It must not go beyond. So, of course, there are still very intensive discussions ahead of us.
Excellent. Well, Commissioner Jourová, you have been a great sport. We covered a lot of ground. Thank you to everyone in the audience for all of your questions and for getting up so early. And we wish you good luck at the college meeting you're about to run off to.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
And it wouldn't be a Politico meeting if I didn't ask you to fill out those evaluation forms. It's the way we keep them fun. It's the way we can improve for next time. So take 2 minutes and have a good day. Thank you. Thank you so much.